Okay, so are you ready to dive deep into something pretty universal? Chicken noodle soup.
Sounds delicious.
You know, we're going way beyond the recipe today, though, right?
Oh, yeah.
You shared how to make chicken noodle soup with us,
Mm-hmm.
and it really got me thinking, like, why is this simple dish like so beloved? I mean, across cultures throughout history,
Right.
there's got to be something more than just good
Oh,
taste.
you're totally right. So
Yeah.
there's a much deeper story here. So while we'll definitely get into making a fantastic bowl of soup,
Yes.
it's also pretty fascinating to think about chicken noodle soup's role as comfort food.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, almost every culture has their version. It's like a culinary hug in a bowl.
I love that, a culinary hug in a bowl. Okay, so the guide starts with the ingredients. Yeah. Pretty standard stuff. Chicken noodles, carrots, celery, onions. But even here, there are things that make a huge difference in the final result.
Yeah, for sure. And this is where understanding the why can really up your soup game.
Okay.
So, for instance, the guide really emphasizes using bone-in chicken for the broth. And it's not just about being fancy or anything.
Okay.
Those bones release collagen and gelatin as they simmer, which gives you a much richer, silkier broth.
Oh.
And it literally coats your spoon.
Oh, that's the kind of detail I love. So that makes sense, though. I always wondered why, like, grandma's soup had that magical texture.
Uh-huh.
Speaking of texture, the guide mentions mirepoix, that classic combo of carrot, celery, and onions.
Yeah.
Is there something more to it than just adding flavor?
There totally is. So mirepoix,
Hmm.
it's not just for soup. It's actually the base for tons of French dishes.
Oh, wow.
And what's really fascinating is the way that each veggie plays a specific role.
Hmm.
So carrots will bring in the sweetness, celery adds this like savory note, and then onions, they provide the depth.
Hmm.
Together, they create like a balanced flavor foundation.
So it's like a flavor symphony.
Exactly.
Each ingredient's playing its own part.
Yeah.
And I have to ask, since we're on the topic of texture, how do you avoid soggy noodles? Especially if you're making like a big batch for leftovers. That's always been my soup nemesis.
Ah, yes, the soggy noodle dilemma.
Yeah.
Well, the guide actually recommends cooking the noodles separately
Okay.
and then adding them just before serving.
Oh.
That way they keep their perfect al dente bite, even if you reheat the soup later.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've covered like the building blocks now. Let's talk about the heart of the matter, the broth. The guide calls it the soul of the soup, and I am all about bringing that soul to life.
I love that. And there really is an art to it. The guide recommends a long, slow simmer to extract a maximum flavor from the chicken bones and veggies. This is where patience really pays off.
Okay.
Think of it like coaxing out secrets. A gentle simmer will reveal nuances that you wouldn't get with a rapid boil.
That makes so much sense. So it's not about speed, it's about building that flavor over time. But I gotta admit, sometimes I just don't have hours to simmer broth. So what if you're like really pressed for time? Is store-bought broth a decent substitute?
It totally can be, especially if you choose a high-quality brand. And here's a pro tip. Even if you are using store-bought broth, simmering it with some extra chicken wings or even veggie scraps for even 30 minutes can really elevate the flavor.
See, this is what I love about this deep dive. Practical tips that make a real difference. Okay, so we've got our flavorful broth simmering away. What's next in our soup-making journey?
Well, the guide dives into this step-by-step cooking process. But before we really get into the mechanics of it, I want to talk about something that really caught my eye. The visual aspect of a great chicken noodle soup.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Yeah, so the guide talks about avoiding a cloudy broth, which can happen if you boil it too aggressively.
Okay.
And a crystal clear broth, it not only looks more appealing, but also indicates a more gentle cooking process,
Okay.
which will preserve the delicate flavors.
So it's like a visual cue for quality. I never even thought about it that way. It's like those chefs who say you eat with your eyes first.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
makes total sense.
And here's another visual tip. Instead of just dumping everything into the pot, think about how you arrange the ingredients in the bowl.
Okay.
A sprinkle of fresh herbs, a swirl of cream, even a few strategically placed noodles can elevate your soup from simple to stunning.
Oh, okay. Now I'm getting really excited to make this soup. So we've got the flavor, the texture, the visuals, it's all coming together. But I'm already thinking ahead to leftovers. Is there a trick to storing chicken noodle soup so it doesn't get weird in the fridge?
Definitely. The key is to let it cool completely before storing it in airtight containers.
Okay.
And remember our noodle trick from earlier. Store the noodles separately and then add them when you reheat for the best texture.
Perfect. So we've covered the broth, the noodles, the veggies. What about the chicken itself? Any tips on how to prep it for optimal flavor and texture?
Great question. The guide recommends shredding the chicken instead of chopping it. Shredding allows the chicken to absorb more broth, making
Oh.
it juicier and more flavorful.
Oh, that's a great tip. I usually just chop it up, but I can definitely see how shredding would make a difference. Now, before we move on to like the actual cooking steps, I have to ask any seasoning secrets. To make this soup truly sing, I'm always so afraid of oversalting.
Yeah, the guide stresses the importance of tasting as you go.
Okay.
Season gradually, starting with a little salt and pepper, and then adjust as the flavors kind of meld together.
Hmm.
Remember, you can always add more, but you can never take it away.
Such wise words. Okay, so we've got our broth simmering, our ingredients prepped, our seasoning strategy is in place. What's next in our chicken noodle soup adventure? I'm ready to get cooking.
But before we get into the step-by-step instructions,
Yeah.
the guide takes kind of a detour into the fascinating world of chicken noodle soup variations. And let me tell you, there's a whole universe of possibilities out there.
Ooh, I can't wait to hear about this. Bring on the variations.
Welcome back to our chicken noodle soup deep dive. Before we jump into those variations, I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier. The cultural significance of this dish.
Yeah.
It's more than just a recipe. It's a whole story.
Absolutely. It's fascinating how chicken noodle soup shows up in so many cultures.
Right.
The guide mentions like ancient Greek texts that talk about chicken broth as a healing remedy.
Wow.
And in Jewish tradition, it's a classic Shabbat meal.
Mhm.
There's even a Chinese version called yemen, which uses egg noodles and ginger.
Exactly. And it's not just about geography.
Right.
It's about history, too.
Yeah.
Think about the Great Depression in America.
Okay.
Chicken noodle soup was like a staple because it was so affordable, nourishing, and it could feed a whole family.
Mm-hmm.
It's a dish that's seen people through tough times.
It's like a culinary time capsule.
Yeah.
And I think that's why it evokes such strong feelings of comfort and nostalgia.
Yeah,
It's a taste of home, of family, of history.
I love that. And speaking of variations, let's get back to that.
Okay.
The guide dives into some pretty creative twists on the classic recipe. Have you ever tried a creamy chicken noodle soup?
I've had it before, but I've never made it myself.
Oh, really?
What's like the secret to that velvety texture?
The guide recommends adding a touch of cream or even coconut milk at the very end of cooking.
Okay.
The key is stir it in gently
Okay.
and avoid boiling the soup after you add the cream so it stays nice and smooth and doesn't curdle.
That makes sense. And what about spicy chicken noodle soup? I love adding a little kick to my dishes.
Ooh, me too. The guide suggests a few options.
Okay.
A pinch of red pepper flakes,
Mm-hmm.
a dash of hot sauce, or even some diced jalapenos for a real fiery punch.
Ooh.
You can even add a dollop of sriracha on top
Okay.
for extra layer of heat.
I'm getting hungry just thinking about it. Now, I know we talked about avoiding soggy noodles earlier, but what about other like common soup making mistakes? What are some pitfalls to watch out for?
One thing the guide really emphasizes is seasoning.
Okay.
It's so easy to oversalt,
Oh, yeah.
especially if you're using store-bought broth, which can be high in sodium already.
Right.
The key is to taste as you go and adjust the seasoning accordingly.
So true. I'm definitely guilty of oversalting in the past.
I think we all are.
Yeah, it's a hard lesson to learn, but once you learn it, you never forget it.
Right. Any other tips to avoid any kitchen disasters?
Yeah. Are there any?
The guide also cautions against overcooking the vegetables.
Okay.
You want them to be tender,
Mm-hmm.
but still have a bit of bite.
Yeah.
Nobody wants mushy carrots and celery in their soup.
Definitely not. And speaking of vegetables, what about variations on the classic mirepoix? Can you like mix things up a bit?
Absolutely. The guide really encourages experimentation.
Okay.
You could add other root vegetables like parsnips or turnips,
Okay.
or even some leafy greens like spinach or kale for a nutritional boost.
I love that idea. And what about the chicken itself? We talked about shredding it,
Yeah.
but are there other ways to like prepare it?
The guide mentions using leftover rotisserie chicken
Oh,
for a super convenient shortcut.
yeah.
You could also use like cooked chicken breasts or even thighs, depending on your preference.
So many possibilities. It's
Yeah.
amazing how such a simple dish can be so versatile.
I know, it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now, before we move on,
Yeah.
I have to ask about a question that popped into my head earlier.
Okay.
We talked about the history and cultural significance of chicken noodle soup,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm curious about its nutritional value.
Right.
Is it actually good for you?
Yeah.
You bet it is.
Oh,
Chicken noodle soup is a nutritional powerhouse.
really?
The chicken provides lean protein.
Okay.
The broth is hydrating and full of electrolytes.
Mm-hmm.
And the vegetables offer vitamins, minerals, and fiber. It's truly a nourishing meal.
I knew it. So it's not just comfort food, it's actually good for your body and soul.
Exactly.
No wonder it's been a go-to remedy for colds and flu for centuries. Now I'm ready to get into the actual cooking steps.
Yeah.
Walk us through the process step by step.
All right, let's do it. The guide starts with...
Wow, we've covered so much ground in this chicken noodle soup deep dive.
I know, right?
From the history and cultural significance to the nutritional value and variations. It's amazing how much there is to discover about this seemingly simple dish.
It really is. It's a testament to the enduring power of food, to connect us to our past,
Yeah.
nourish our bodies,
Yeah.
and inspire our creativity in the kitchen.
Absolutely. And speaking of creativity, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier. The idea that chicken noodle soup is like a blank canvas for culinary expression. What are some unique twists that listeners might want to try at home?
Ooh, okay, let's get those taste buds tingling.
Yes.
How about a Moroccan-inspired chicken noodle soup with warming spices like cumin, turmeric, and ginger?
Okay, yeah.
You can even add a touch of harissa paste for a hint of heat.
Ooh, I love that idea. It's like taking a culinary journey with each spoonful. What about something a little closer to home? Any twists on the classic American version?
Totally. How about a southwestern spin
Okay.
with black beans, corn, and fire-roasted tomatoes? You could even top it with a dollop of avocado crema and a sprinkle of cotija cheese
Yep.
for a truly satisfying meal.
Now you're talking my language. I'm all about those bold flavors. And speaking of flavors, what about experimenting with different types of noodles? We've talked about egg noodles,
Right.
but what else is out there?
Ooh. The world of noodles is your oyster.
Ooh,
You could try rice noodles for a lighter, more delicate texture,
okay.
or soba noodles for a nutty, earthy flavor.
Oh, yeah.
Even pasta shapes like ditalini or asso can add a fun twist to the classic soup.
So many delicious possibilities. And I think that's the beauty of this deep dive.
Right.
It's not just about following a recipe. It's about sparking inspiration and encouraging people to get creative in the kitchen.
Exactly. Chicken noodle soup is so much more than just a meal.
Right.
It's a celebration of flavor, tradition, and the joy of cooking.
Beautifully said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. What will your signature chicken noodle soup be?
Ooh, good question.
What flavors, ingredients, and techniques will you bring to the table?
Don't be afraid to experiment, to break the rules, and to make this classic dish your own.
And remember, the most important ingredient is love. So gather your loved ones, share a pot of steaming soup, and savor the moment. Happy cooking.